Have you ever held a fragile artifact in your hands, something beautiful, ancient, and immensely valuable, and realized the only person who truly understood its worth was you, the one who bore its weight for years? The text message that landed on Mave Whitlock's screen wasn't just a cold sentence. It was the final, brutal chisel blow that freed a statue from its stone prison. We need distance from you. Please stop contacting us completely. No call, no pause to breathe. It was an ultimatum wrapped in a dismissal, a declaration of exile from a family she had financially sustained, a family that saw her less as a daughter and sister and more as a highly reliable, interest-free ATM. That single, blinding flare of white text against the blue screen, instead of sparking the expected conflagration of panic and grief, ignited something far more powerful, a cold, crystalline clarity. In that moment, Mave realized the cruel irony. She hadn't been left behind. She had been dropped a debt too inconvenient to carry, now that she had finally dared to set a boundary. Before Mave even typed her calm, final reply, a silent, epical shift occurred within her. She wasn't just losing a family, she was shedding an entire identity, the banker girl, the problem solver, the endless reservoir. This profound moment of severance connects us to the universal human drama of self-emancipation, a journey echoed in the narratives of countless historical figures who chose truth over comfort. Consider Henry David Thoreau, who sought distance from societal expectations at Walden Pond to discover a sublime, advanced vocabulary of such excellence, grandeur, or beauty as to inspire great admiration or awe, truth about self-reliance. Or reflect on the Stoic philosophy, which teaches that we must only concern ourselves with what is within our locus of control, idiom, the range of things a person can influence or control, releasing the need to manage the expectations or emotions of others. Mave's immediate, visceral reaction, typing back a line of profound, detached acceptance, was her Walden moment. She was choosing the vast, terrifying, but ultimately fertile ground of solitude over the smothering, shallow soil of perpetual obligation. The ensuing silence, heavier than any argument, became the proving ground for a new self, one who understood that genuine love cannot be purchased, and that sacrificing your peace for others' convenience is not duty, it is self-betrayal. Her simple response was not a defeat, it was a strategically executed retreat from a battlefield where the rules were rigged against her, a move that would ultimately cost her family the very foundation they took for granted. The sheer volume of this betrayal, the quiet, pervasive nature of their financial and emotional usurpation, advanced vocabulary, taking a position of power or importance illegally or by force, here, taking Mave's money and privacy without right, forced a confrontation not just with them, but with the years she spent silencing her own needs. This script is not about losing a family, it's about gaining a life. What historical or personal moment of necessary severance has defined the truest version of your own self? The subsequent days, following the shock of the text, were not a period of recovery, but a deeply intentional phase of archaeological self-discovery, leading Mave down the rabbit hole of her own past. A journey that demanded both meticulous organization and profound emotional courage. When Uncle Grant, the singular voice of quiet truth in the family diaspora, advanced vocabulary, the dispersion of any people from their original homeland, here, the emotional scattering of her family, called to confirm the physical upheaval. The packing, the sudden, deliberate disappearance, it was less a confirmation of loss and more the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. They weren't just ending the relationship, they were terminating the contract of Mave's support and absconding with the evidence of their dependence. This realization, sparked by the sight of Grant boxing up their lives, transformed her apartment into an intellectual laboratory. She spread the years of color-coded receipts across the floor, not as relics of payment, but as primary sources, a historical term, original materials that have not been interpreted, a tangible, quantitative record of her self-erasure. Green for housing, yellow for utilities, red for medical, a 7-year tapestry of financial subservience. Viewing these documents became Mave's personal moment of enlightenment. It was the moment she understood that the family narrative she'd been sold, the one about duty, loyalty, and being the responsible one, was a specious, advanced vocabulary, superficially plausible, but actually wrong, misleading in appearance. Cover story for outright exploitation. Her emotional development in this phase mirrors the historical shift from the feudal system to the modern contract, moving from a relationship based on unwritten, hereditary obligation to one based on explicit, negotiated terms. She recognized the quid pro quo, idiom/Latin phrase, a favor or advantage granted or expected in return for something, that was never balanced, her money for their approval. The philosophical teaching here is that epistemology, the study of knowledge, must be personal. Maeve had to know the truth of her situation by observing the undeniable facts, not by listening to the emotional rhetoric. Elias, her steady, unjudging presence, arrived not to mend her broken heart, but to help her read the data, transforming her shame into actionable intelligence. His simple request, "Show me what you've been carrying," was the invitation to apply professional precision to her emotional life. This meticulous accounting prepared her for the next, inevitable stage, the confrontation, not of anger, but of cold, unassailable fact. The consultation with Dr. Priya, the calm confirmation that ending a financial entanglement isn't abandonment. Its self-preservation was the psychological equivalent of signing a declaration of independence. Maeve's newfound purpose was not retaliation, but the surgical removal of the infrastructure they had depended on. This period solidified the universal wisdom that freedom often begins not with a shout, but with the quiet, deliberate assembly of the truth, often found in the receipts and the records we keep hidden. The shift from emotional paralysis to strategic action exemplifies how English learning, through the disciplined use of professional language and clear documentation, can be the very weapon of self-defense. When you look at the receipts of your own life, what story of unacknowledged labor do they quietly tell? The execution of Maeve's strategy was a masterpiece of controlled communication, a demonstration of how precision in language can be far more devastating than any emotional outburst. The family's immediate panic, the flurry of texts demanding a response, were a predictable echo of their entitlement, a desperate attempt to drag her back into the emotional fray and restore the status quo. Maeve understood that engaging in their drama, the accusation, the guilt, the shame, would be to validate their narrative. Instead, she chose the language of consequence, a linguistic shift that instantly elevated her from victim to executive. Her message to the group chat was a marvel of professional detachment, a summary of payments, photos of the supporting documentation, and the surgical line confirming the end of the direct deposits, a financial term. The electronic transfer of a payment directly from the account of the payer to the recipient's account. She didn't argue, she reported. She didn't accuse, she itemized. This transition reflects a sophisticated application of English, moving from the emotionally charged language of the domestic sphere to the impersonal register, a sociolinguistic term, a style of language used in formal, professional, or technical contexts. The choice of the phrase, "I'm honoring your request for distance," was an exquisite deployment of irony, using their own words to build her fortress of solitude. The group chat response was a case study in psychological manipulation, the predictable swing from anger, "Don't weaponize it," to manufactured martyrdom, "You're sick," and finally to thinly veiled threat, "I can't afford to move right now. I'll be in a dangerous area." This cycle of emotional blackmail is a universal pattern in dysfunctional relationships, and Maeve's steady refusal to take the bait, idiom, something tempting used to lure a person into a trap or undesirable situation, was the ultimate act of self-sovereignty. Her single, factual counter-response to Nora's threat, "I hope you stay safe, but I'm not responsible for your lifestyle," was a philosophical statement, the clear separation of empathy, hoping for safety, from responsibility, paying for the consequences. The arrival of Grant with the untouched, still packaged items she had purchased for them, the blender, the towels, was the narrative's emotional centerpiece. These boxes were not just forgotten goods, they were tangible symbols of her wasted goodwill, her small, unacknowledged attempts to contribute, which were literally cast aside. Grant's silent, knowing validation, "Don't let them twist this," was the only external affirmation Mave needed, a truth spoken by a man whose work was built on the reality of physical weight and honest labor. The extended family's late-night intervention, the sudden appearance of the cousins and aunts, was an attempt to restore the collective illusion, to use the sheer force of social pressure, the tyranny of the majority, a philosophical concept. A situation where a majority faction rules oppressively over a minority faction, to shame her back into compliance. Mave's response, however, was revolutionary, a simple document detailing budget templates, renter's aid, and utility resources. This final act was a masterclass in philosophical teaching. Instead of giving them a fish, money, she gave them the fishing gear, tools for self-sufficiency, accompanied by the empowering, non-negotiable truth: "You're capable. You always have been." This act shifted the entire emotional weight of the crisis back onto their own shoulders, leaving behind a silence far more profound than any noise they could generate. How can the precise, factual language of business be used as a shield against the vague, manipulative language of emotional conflict? The stillness that followed the digital firestorm was not merely the absence of notification sounds. It was a vast, echoing terra incognita, Latin/idiom, unknown land, unexplored territory, the quiet landscape of Mave's newly claimed autonomy. The final, searing message from her mother, ***, if you do this, you're dead to me, ***, was the ultimate, desperate play, the nuclear option of guilt. The fact that Mave stared at it and felt no pain, only a chilling sense of confirmation, was the ultimate measure of her emotional distance. Her calm, final reply, "I'm sorry you feel that way," was an act of grace and self-preservation, acknowledging their emotion without owning the guilt. This response is an exemplary model of nonviolent communication, a system of communication focused on empathy and honest expression, separating the observation, their feelings, from the moral judgment, Mave's actions. The subsequent silence, the complete cessation of their demands, was the first true evidence of her victory. She hadn't defeated them, she had simply ceased to participate in the game. By morning, the silence was the sound of her own life beginning. This phase is a powerful instruction in mindfulness, a concept in psychology and spirituality, maintaining a moment-by-moment awareness of one's thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, and surrounding environment. Mave was finally present in her own apartment, attentive to the simple, authentic sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the quiet thud of the upstairs neighbor, the soundtrack of an unencumbered, advanced vocabulary. Not burdened by obligations or difficulties, free existence. The methodical process of changing passwords and cutting the final financial threads felt less like destruction and more like the decommissioning, a technical term, the process of safely removing a facility or system from operation of a dangerous, long overdue structure. Her conversation with Dr. Priya perfectly summarized the initial confusion of freedom. Peace can feel dangerous when you've lived in chaos. This feeling, the strange fear of calm, is a common psychological phenomenon for those emerging from prolonged stress. The modern relevance of Mave's journey to English learning is profound. She transitioned from a passive voice, the banker girl, who was asked to pay, to an active voice, the woman who chose to terminate support, reclaiming her agency not just in life, but in the structure of her narrative. The universal wisdom Mave learned in the quiet of her apartment is that the boundary is not a wall to keep others out. It is a fence to keep you in, protecting the fertile ground of your own well-being. Elias's consistent, quiet support was crucial. He never tried to fix the situation, only to ground her in the present reality, affirming her worth without qualification. Her subsequent weeks were a study in the gradual, revolutionary accumulation of simple peace. She walked without checking her phone, cooked without bracing for impact, and finally allowed the silence to evolve from a feeling of abandonment into a palpable sense of sovereignty, advanced vocabulary, supreme and independent authority over a territory or, in this case, oneself. Maeve's story culminates not in an act of vengeance, but in an act of absolute self-love, proving that the truest form of power is the power to withdraw consent. What new, quiet sound has emerged in your life only after you made the difficult decision to stop listening to the noise of others' expectations? Mave Whitlock's journey from banker girl to self-sovereign individual is an archetypal, advanced vocabulary, very typical of a certain kind of person or thing, an original pattern or model, narrative of self-reclamation. A powerful testament to the idea that true freedom is found not in accumulating wealth, but in reducing unnecessary debt, both financial and emotional. The profound lesson of her story is the difference between support and enablement. For years, Mave believed she was supporting her family, but the evidence of the color-coded receipts proved she was enabling a destructive cycle of dependence and disrespect. The philosophical teaching here is an examination of the ethics of obligation. Genuine moral duty must be reciprocal and freely given, not extracted through guilt or coercion. When that reciprocity is absent, the obligation becomes a form of enslavement. Maeve's action was a modern-day echo of the Roman principle of fiat justitia ut caelum, Latin maxim, let justice be done, though the heavens fall, choosing the difficult, factual truth over the comfortable, enabling lie. The modern relevance of Maeve's experience to English learning is the mastery of rhetoric, the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing, in self-advocacy. She shifted from using language to placate, explaining, justifying, begging, to using it to prescribe, stating facts, setting terms, outlining consequences, a transformation in communication style that mirrored her internal shift in power. Her journey underscores the universal wisdom that boundaries are not the antithesis of love, they are the prerequisites for it, defining where one person ends and another begins. Her concluding thoughts, that love without respect isn't love and that boundaries are survival, are the distilled essence of her painful, necessary education. She learned that the story her family told about her being the responsible one was a euphemism, advanced vocabulary, a mild or indirect word or expression substituted for one considered to be too harsh or blunt, for being the resource. The enduring power of this narrative lies in its call to personal accountability. Maeve's final act of vulnerability, inviting others to share their own stories of severance in the comments, transforms her private pain into a public source of inspiration, turning a narrative of loss into a community of shared strength. The relief she felt, the fear that it might be dangerous, was the healthy terror of stepping into a life where her needs were no longer negotiable. This terrifying lightness is the feeling of having extricated, advanced vocabulary, freeing someone or something from a constraint or difficulty, oneself completely from the knots of the past. Her story is a map for anyone trapped in a similar dynamic, a clear guide on how to gather the facts, deploy the language of consequence, and finally, bravely, choose the quiet life you have actually earned. The true cost of her calm reply was the loss of a dysfunctional family structure, but the invaluable profit was the soul, complete ownership of her future.